Welcome. This recording will be broken up into two parts. So the first part will be the presentation, and the second part will be the meditation portion. So we'll start by connecting inward before we begin the presentation. So you can bring your awareness inwardly and just observe the breath for a few moments. Just to allow your awareness to move inwardly. You're watching the breath without trying to change it, with an intention to connect inwardly in the heart. Letting go as best as you can. Invoking the presence of all the aspects of your own consciousness that can be useful and helpful to you, and all the non-physical assistance available to you in infinite and unconditional love, infinite empowerment, and infinite intelligence to assist us on our journey, connecting with our quantum selves and connecting quantumly with the people that we are in relationships with. With the intention of evolving and expanding our own consciousness and the field of consciousness that connects us with others. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for taking the time every day to do the meditations and document the progress. And in addition to that, in addition to the daily tracker and the monthly check-ins at the end of each month, we have the synchronicity forms that you can fill out when you have a synchronistic experience. Something that happens with another person that seems meaningful, something that just comes your way. You can put those down. You can make a new one every time something like that happens. And then I created another one that's called Meaningful or Notable Experiences. And so those would be for the things that happen that are not involving someone else. That might be something that happens internally. It's not necessarily synchronistic, but it just seems notable. It might be something strange or meaningful or confusing. For example, when I was doing my meditation yesterday, once the energy moved up the spine to the head, I had a sense of smoke, almost like I could smell smoke, but I couldn't physically smell smoke. So it was just more of like an energetic sense of smoke. So that felt notable. So I filled one out for myself. And so anything like that, just anything that seems, even if it's a confusing or strange experience, or just something that gets your attention, you can fill one out each time something like that happens. So thank you for doing those things too. And we'll start the presentation today with the last few slides from last time, because they're just central to this theme right now, with the meditations that we're doing. So last time we talked about the raising of the Jed. The Jed is the central pathway along the spine. It's energetic, and it includes major energy centers along the way that some call chakras. And the activation of this pathway in the centers awakens dormant aspects of consciousness. And the Sekhem that we talked about last time is just a word from Egyptian traditions that means life force, and other traditions call it chi or vital energy or prana. And there's a lot of depictions of the serpent, metaphorically, because the life force moving up the central channel has a serpentine-like structure. It undulates, it's wave-like, it sways from side to side. And when this life force reaches the head, it spreads out across both sides or both hemispheres of the brain, like a cobra spreading its hood. And so as we are doing these meditations in this way, we're becoming more familiar with the sensation of subtle energy or vital energy or life force, whatever you want to call it, moving up that central channel. So the vital energy being erect in the spine, with this image over here of the spine and the brain lit up, and this image on the right side of these columns that you see in Egypt, which were structural, but also symbolic of this force moving upward. So when the energy is moving up the spine to the brain in an unobstructed way, a sense of coherence and magnetism is generated. It could be very subtle, so you're just observing. This process is not always an easy process. It can eat up energetic debris, and there can be effects from this. So in the ancient Egyptian tradition, this is what's called barriers to flight. The obstacles to one's expansion of consciousness were called barriers to flight. For one to feel really safe with another person, that foundational self must be accepted and appreciated. So in childhood, there's usually many pressures and obstacles, and in a way, the personality is set like a piece of metal in a foundry. And to change the shape and structure of the metal of our own structure, the heat has to become as hot as it did in the formation. And most of us want to avoid this, of course, and intimate relationships can create this sort of heat. And we can also experience this sort of heat in our own process, in our own meditative process. Psychological heat. Most of us will avoid the heat generated when neuroses rub up against one another. And if both people can be radically honest with themselves and with the other person, then that psychological honesty results in psychological insight. That's from Tom Kenyon's book, The Magdalene Manuscript. So things to keep in mind when you're doing these meditations and moving through this process is, what do you do when the heat is turned up? Do you become numb? Do you become emotionally distant? Do you become angry? Blame yourself? Blame someone else? Just things to note when you observe them. And also in your own meditations, these things might get triggered. And so again, revisiting that concept of inner alchemy, that's the whole point, to alchemize, to transform these energies. So don't shy away from the heat. You can just sit with it and observe it and know that it is changing. It's in process. If you're feeling that, that's in process of changing anyway. So just let it. It's not going to last forever. If something becomes painful, stop. Don't do something that's creating pain. You can just stop whatever practice you're practicing, and it can be revisited later when you're feeling better. Intention is another huge concept. Intention is vital in the quantum realm because one can affect quantum events in the mind and the body because of how our neurology and our cells work. Intention affects the quantum, but not Newtonian. So the saying, where your attention goes, energy flows, is very relevant for these meditations that we're doing. It's also relevant in relationships or just daily life. Whatever, you're thinking about gets energized. So keep that in mind in your meditations. Where your energy goes, where your attention goes, energy flows. When your attention moves from the base of the spine to the top of the head, the energy is flowing there too. The energy follows. I included this quote from Paramahansa Yogananda because I love how he gives this visual about magnetic attractors and the what we transmit and what we attract. So this is the quote: "The will projected from the point between the eyebrows is the broadcasting apparatus of thought." Man's feeling or emotional power, calmly concentrated on the heart, causes it to act as a mental radio that receives the messages of others from far and near. So that point between the eyebrows is like what, broadcasts the energetics of our thoughts outward. And that energy in the heart, that's more associated with feeling or emotion, is more like a receiver receiving messages, according to Paramahansa Yogananda. So thinking about relationships also as alchemical. So last time we talked about the example of the teacup as an analogy of inner alchemy. So the teacup is the container. The form that's being changed is the water changing into tea. And the energy source is the heat underneath. So the container in a relationship is our mental attention, but also safety and appreciation. The form or to be changed is the dynamics that have become habit between two people and also the habits within the self. And the energy source is an unlimited field of energy. We have unlimited source for that. So when we're talking about quantum reality versus physical reality, we don't experience quantum reality directly. We experience it indirectly through our physical senses and beliefs. Our experiences are filtered. So many things are a co-creation between the body and the mind, between the soul and the ego, which is basically conditioning. Relationships are a co-creation. Organizations are a co-creation. And if you look at this image of pure undivided consciousness at the top versus in quantum physics, you hear the term the collapse of the wave function into more of a particle reality or a physical reality. Then it's like a subject and an object, like a me and a you, where there's separateness in space and time. Whereas when we're outside of space and time, there's a oneness and undivided consciousness where there's potentiality for a subject, potentiality for an object, but that it's all floating in one consciousness that's connected. So we'll go through 3 of the main points of quantum science. The first is called non-locality, and this is basically signal-less communication. It's instantaneous communication. It is outside of space and time, and it is faster than the speed of light. So these experiments that proved this were by Dr. Jacobo Grinberg Zeilerbaum at the University of Mexico. So what they did was they had 2 people that meditated together, and then they were separated. And they were each put in a Faraday chamber, which means electromagnetic radiation cannot move in or out. So there is no way that signals can be passed between the 2 people. The first person is shown a series of flashing lights, and both are hooked up to brain monitors. So the second person, 25% of the time, exhibited a similar brain response. And in the control group, that happened. There was no correlation in the control groups. So that's interesting because, the difference is that the 2 people who showed similar brain patterns 25% of the time, they were meditating together, and then they were separated with the intention of continuing to maintain some sort of connection. And these experiments were replicated by different scientists at different labs, and they got similar results. So these are some comments by different people about morphic resonance, which is what these series of experiments proved. So this first one is from Dr. Grinberg. Only when the brain-mind system is free from interpretations do the neuronal field and the pre-space structure become identical. And this is from Eric Thompson, who did like a review of these different experiments. Many variations of this study by different scientists suggest the existence of a universal matrix, a non-local field that facilitates material existence through an invisible flow of energy and information. Albert Einstein said the field is the only reality. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist, and he theorized that self-organizing systems are shaped and governed by morphic fields. Jung's collective unconscious is an example of this. And there are many, many examples of morphic resonance. Flocks of geese, schools of fish, butterflies, and their migration patterns, learning. So in a study, the children were given a Morse code that already existed and then a made-up Morse code, and it was easier for them to learn the existing Morse code, even though they had never been exposed to any of it before. But the idea is that because that was a known thing in the society, that they were accessing that from the collective unconscious. Same with these poems. There was a study where children were taught poems. Some were very well-known poems, although the children had never been exposed to them before, versus poems that were written for the study. It was easier for them to learn the known poems versus the newer poems. So the second concept in quantum science is discontinuity, and this is commonly called quantum leap. So electrons orbiting a nucleus, they jump from one orbit to another without passing through the intervening space. And when they do this, they emit a spark of light. And we call this, we can also, as humans, jump in the non-local matrix. Quantum connection is discontinuous, not continuous. So intuitive information seemingly comes out of nowhere. It does not follow a continuous flow of conscious thought, and that's why this is called discontinuity, because it's discontinuous. These are aha moments when that light bulb of awareness goes off. And we can encourage quantum leaping within ourselves by feeling the end result of your creation through your intention. Niels Bohr did experiments with electrons. So the electrons jumping from one energy level or orbit to another without passing through intervening space. They disappear and reappear in a new orbit simultaneously. And so this shows that time and space in this sense are irrelevant. And this is an example, an image of an electron disappearing, reappearing, emitting a spark of light. But in reality, these are more orbital versus orbit. So it's more like a cloud or orbital than like a planetary model or an orbit. In science class, in the science books, it's that model with the rings as the orbits, but it's more like a cloud. The electrons closest to the nucleus have a lower energy state, and the farther from the nucleus, they have a higher energy state. So another concept is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says that we cannot measure and know both where an electron is and where it's going. We can't know both of these things at the same time. The third concept in quantum physics is called tangled hierarchy. And to me, this is the trait of quantum science, and it encompasses non-locality and discontinuity. And these experiments, the researchers that proved this, three of them won the Nobel Prize in 2022. So the concept is that when electrons or photons are correlated, they form a quantum system and maintain instant communication regardless of the distance between them. So if you take them and you separate them by large distances and you manipulate one, the other responds simultaneously. So there's no signal between space and time. It's instantaneous. So tangled hierarchical relationships, this is where one feeds and causes the other equally. You change, it changes. There's a field that connects the two. This quote from Wayne Dyer, I feel is relevant to this. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Probably not how you expect, because that's based on conditioning. And this image to me is an example of tangled hierarchy. One hand is drawing the other hand drawing the first. Well, not one responsible for the other, but both are creating this. A simple hierarchy versus a tangled hierarchy. A simple hierarchy is one way. One's the leader, the other's the receiver. It's a local signaled communication, separate. Whereas a tangled hierarchy is a circular cause. Both equally cause change in the other. It's non-local, it's instant communication. Two objects are one, there's a co-creation. So the double slit experiment, there's lots of YouTube explanations of this that you can get some good visuals. But the two things that this proves is that there are two domains of reality and there is an observer effect or a measurement effect. So the image on the left is what happens when there's an observer or a measurement tool, like a detector in the room. And the image on the right is what happens when you remove any sort of observation or detection in the room. So these studies have been done with electrons and with photons. So in this example, it's electrons. So you take an electron gun, it's shooting out electrons. They have to go through the two slits in the first screen and they plop on the second screen, just like you would expect, you know, on the other side of that slit is where the particle lands. But when you remove an observer, what you get is very different. It moves through the two slits. It creates a wave interference pattern, which indicates that the behavior in this study is that of a wave, not a particle. So how does it know that it should act like a particle when it's being observed or measured? And when there's no measurement or observation, it's acting like a wave. How can it be two different ways? This is an image from Young's double slit experiment arrangement. So this image shows light, photons. So the light is released. The wave passes through slit A and slit B, splitting into two different waves, which cause crests and troughs to interfere with each other. And that's what creates the wave pattern that you see on the right-hand side. The screen on the right-hand side shows a splatter and then nothing, and then a splatter, and then nothing, and then a splatter, and then nothing. It's because these waves canceled each other out and created a wave interference pattern. So this is similar to what we saw on an earlier screen. The one on the left is just simpler. It's just pure consciousness. When the wave collapses into a domain of actuality, a physical reality, then you've got separate subjects and objects. On the right, it's broken up into outside of space and time is the oneness of undivided consciousness, where there's potentiality for everything, but there is a connection between all of it. And then it collapses into a more physical, tangible reality, into seemingly separate subjects and objects. So that is all the slides that we'll do, but I wanted to give a foundation for quantum physics, because that's what we're trying to engage with in the meditations. We're trying to engage with the more subtle aspects of the self, the more subtle happenings within us, the movement of energy up the spine to the top of the head, and connecting with an expanded state of consciousness within us to eventually create connectability with someone else from this expanded state. So later when we do the meditation, that will be the focus, and hopefully these slides will have provided some foundation for that.